Hello, beautiful moms and entrepreneurs. My name is Charisse Walker, and I'm your host of the Unbreakable Mompreneurs podcast. This is a place where we come together to learn, grow, and inspire. So sit back, relax, and let's get started. Hello, Unbreakable Mompreneurs. My name is Charisse Walker, and today I am here with Sharon Soliday-Rolin. And I am so excited to talk to you because reading through your bio and having a conversation, you were very accomplished, and especially with building a multi-million-dollar business that you sold. And then you work with kids now talking about money and encouraging parents to talk about money and teach kids about that. So I've kind of given a spoiler alert. So moms, I want you to hear this because today we're going to talk about if you really want to scale your business, how she did it. And then we're also going to talk about the importance of children and what we should be teaching our children instead of keeping things a secret like we as parents like to do.
Oh, yeah.
Sharon, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Well, thank you so much. And thank you for having me. I really do appreciate the opportunity to share. If my bit of wisdom can help someone else, another mom, that's fantastic. I'll start off that my name is Sharon. Obviously, I grew up in a low-income environment, and I knew education was going to be my ticket out. And so I had a goal to get through college, and I was, despite the fact that we were in a low-income environment, I had a lot of privilege in that my dad worked for the railroad. We were stable in terms of housing. So I was the oldest of five, though. So, and there's a lot of years between me and the youngest. So I understand what it's like to try to hustle and have to provide for other kids in the family. But at the same time, I ended up doing 2 years at a community college because it's what I could afford. I worked 2 jobs as a waitress, so I always tip well now. And gosh, all sorts of other things. I did telemarketing. That was back in the 80s, early 90s. Then I transferred to a 4-year state college. And in my case, that was Fresno State. So I was in California at the time.
Go Bulldogs.
Go Bulldogs, exactly. So yes, then for graduate school, because I had decided by that point I wanted to be a speech language pathologist. And that is somebody who works with individuals who struggle with communication disorders. And it can be anything from kids who can't say S and R, which is most often what people think of when you say that at a cocktail party. They're like, oh, you help those kids who can't talk or kids who stutter. And it's like, yeah, that's part of it. But in addition, we do all sorts of other stuff, lots of language, lots of individuals with autism and their communication needs. And if you look at the other extreme at the other end, stroke patients and elderly population or head trauma, that sort of thing, where we help people kind of access communication. And we're sort of I describe it, the high holy trinity of OT, PT, and speech. So we're the rehab professionals that get people going again. And my first husband at the time was also a speech pathologist. And we joke that we may not have noticed if our daughter didn't learn to walk, but we definitely were all hyper about what she was going to be like and how to support communication. So that is kind of where the story began. I was a speech pathologist for 10 years in the public setting. I worked primarily with adolescents and all sorts of different types of disabilities and challenges. And then I thought, there's a better way to do this. And I was facing the reality check, as all moms do, especially in the US. My kid's about to start school. Where am I supposed to put her when I'm sitting at my desk at 8 a.m. and she's not supposed to be in a kindergarten class until 8:45? Do I leave her on a street corner? And if there's no before school care, what do you do? We were very fortunate. My husband and I each worked less than full time and lived very frugally because of that, the first 5 years of her life, to keep her out of full-time daycare. She was in a couple days of daycare. But we thought, this is great. So we were accustomed to kind of doing things on our own terms. And that's when I thought, well, now that she has to go to school, as I said to my husband, you need to go to work full time. And I'm going to start contracting my own services and have my own little business. And that way I could schedule around her school hours to be there for drop off and pickup. Now, I recognize your target audience is off really single moms, and there's a huge advantage when you have a partner in the relationships who can hold the roof of the house up while you're building your business. In my case, it was actually a couple of years later that my husband was diagnosed with a brain tumor that really took him out for the count. I mean, he didn't die, but and is doing better, although it's reoccurred, and that's a whole nother issue. But his health really put him out of the count. And that's when I also knew a couple of years into my business that I need to really put my foot to the gas because I have to now support the family entirely. I can't rely on him to be working because he couldn't. And so that was a crazy shift. I look back at that and my schedule, which I'm sure your listeners can appreciate, is I would get up and get ready for school things. She went to school and I was a service provider still in my little, I call it a rehab business. So I would go and work somewhere during her school hours. I'd come home. My mom moved closer. So periodically mom would pick her up, but she could come home then. And I was mom from like 4 to 7. We're very fortunate, our child, and we only had one. So we got to play 1-to-1, not zone defense. And so I'm so much more compassionate. My siblings have multiple kids, like 3 and 4, and I watch them in action and I'm like, oh my gosh, you are so outnumbered here, but you're all doing a great job. No matter what you're doing a great job because you've made it through the day. But we were fortunate. We had one child, and fortunately, she needed lots of sleep. So we had a very pretty strict 7:30 bedtime. And I remember it so vividly because then like 7:30 to 9:30 was my family time. Husband and I might watch a TV show or get caught up on the day. And then he was back in bed and I would be up till 1:30 or 2 because then I had to work on the business and I was writing contracts and I was coming up with proposals and I was doing everything you have to do in that time period. I took out the trash. I would do billing or payroll. So that went on for several years. And fortunately, we eventually hired enough people where I could work less directly in the business and work more on it. And I quickly figured out what my strengths were not. And that was the first person I hired. So at least, full time besides myself. So that's kind of the shortcut. And then the business ran it for 17 years. And by that point, I knew I was going to, around year 12, I had decided I want to grow this to where I can sell it. And I started really studying and listening to people. When you want to exit your business, what do you have to know and do? And ironically, the most important thing is you have to make yourself irrelevant. You have to get out of it because if it's dependent on you, you're hosed. No one wants to buy a business that can't function without you because they're about to buy it from you. So I was learning how to do that and what that meant and kind of watching valuations of what companies were selling for. By that point, we were 100 employees in 6 states. And that I felt the timing was right. And so we pulled the trigger and I had a great broker and the rest is history. I'm now living happily ever after. I call this my happily ever after time of life. And so I'm on my second marriage now. And, it's all great. It's all great.
So you gave so many golden nuggets that I don't know if our listeners heard, because you talked about how you realized you had to step on the gas. And so you leaned into what you know and what you're comfortable with. And then you worked on it, but then you figured out what your skills are that you didn't enjoy and you hired. So how long from the time that you started to the time that you hired a person, maybe not even full time, but what did you do with that?
Well, I immediately contracted out. I had a virtual assistant to handle things that came up during the day, like answering the phone. Like if I'm at a work site, because I was still working then, I needed somebody who could answer the phone, answer questions. And I found an individual who happened to be a stay-at-home mom who, frankly, I think they're working harder than anybody else.
I agree.
But her kids were her kids were very tiny, and so she was able to, take my calls. They weren't that frequent, and also I operated from a sales perspective, from an opportunity, from a place of giving. So I always wanted to give something before we ever asked for a contract for somebody. So I might send an early intervention center a series of books, just to introduce ourselves, for kids, or free lunch bags to give out to kids in need, that sort of thing. And that was our way to provide a warm introduction of, hey, who we are, versus just the cold call that all our competitors were just doing.
So it's kind of a lead magnet or a freebie. It's
right.
A tangible one.
Absolutely. And, things I did well and smart early on. Some of them I stumbled into. But so I hired a bookkeeper part-time because I was just afraid of getting audited. So I thought somebody else has to be keeping the books to make sure I can learn this and do it right. And I did our family's books, but there was a certain amount of trepidation. So, and then I had a sort of a lawyer on call who would just look at contracts. I contract out those needs as they would come up. And then that virtual assistant who was very helpful. But then, and this is a great tip I got, and I'll pass on to your listeners, I actually took an org chart and created, like, okay, if I were a multi-million-dollar company, what would the roles be that would have to be filled? And then make a box for each one. And if you're doing all of them, put your name in every box. And you will quickly learn, though, because you're so busy doing everything in the beginning that you're not parsing out, this is really an operations job, or this is really a marketing job, or this is really, something else, sales. And so I had CEO at the top, and I really liked that role because I was good at goal setting and trajectory vision making and, all this kind of thinking part of the business. I enjoyed that, and the creative thinking piece. The things I loathed were the detail oriented things that were so critical. Contracts with liability language that when you work with kids, you just, and I was working pediatrics at the time, it was really important. I couldn't screw that up. And so that stuff, I did it when I had to do it on my own, but I quickly realized this is not my gift. I do not like this. And I ended up hiring a woman who part-time, she had been working with me and just as a service provider, but then she had a gift for, gosh, really organizing the details of, she would bring things to my attention. Well, what about this in the contract? Blah, blah. I'm like, have you ever thought about maybe doing just this piece full time or like half time? So she probably started half time, and then eventually as we grew, that her role became full time. So and really up till for a decade, I had that org chart in my own desk or in my own office on my desk. And I would really, because otherwise you get sucked down a rabbit hole and suddenly you've lost the whole day and you're like, what have I done? Like this was all related to X. And it's like, okay, it gives you some framework then of like, okay, I just spent 8 hours on sale leads. Like that is a job that I can put under a sales responsibility. And it really kind of helps you flesh out what different jobs look like. So when it comes time to write a job description, when you're really actually ready to hire someone, that really makes it a lot easier. So
that is so true because it's easy to say, oh, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this. But if you add up your time, like how much you were making talking with clients versus how much you're losing doing your bookkeeping or doing some of the sales calls, it really, you're holding yourself back when you don't outsource. And again, it doesn't have to be a full-time person. I like how you said she was part-time until we moved into full-time.
Right. And I think sometimes and maybe not as much with women, but definitely with men, that I've been in a lot of entrepreneur groups.
Yeah.
But there's a whole lot of ego involved in being an entrepreneur. I'm one of them. I'm a serial entrepreneur and I start business here. And part of that in order to have the bravery and fortitude and courage to do that, you kind of have to have enough ego and arrogance to go, yeah, I can do that, of course. The downside is I also think if the pilot died in the plane, I could land the plane. I tell my husband all the time, don't worry, I'll figure it out. And he's like, yeah, you have no training in that. Or like someone has a heart attack. I'm like, oh yeah, I can handle that. He's like, you have no training, Sharon. He goes, I appreciate the fact you're so confident, but it's part of that comes from just being a mom when you have to step up and do anything. But part of it is as an entrepreneur, you actually believe you can do just about anything. You might have to learn a few things, but you can do it. And that's a tremendous gift, that confidence. But the flip side of that confidence is that entrepreneurs can be really slow to delegate and really slow to recognize what their own weaknesses are because they either spend too much time on their strengths, areas that are working for them, and neglect pieces of the business because they just don't like it. But if you don't delegate and figure out, kind of do that real hard inventory of what do I have to get behind, what can I let go, then, and you also have to let people do a job without you coming back and micromanaging it behind them. You need to just accept what they tell you. And that's a tough one. As we grew, I actually got tossed out of our own executive meetings. And I said to the second person, she came into my office one day and said, she said, well, I say that virtually because we were all virtual for a long time, way before COVID. And she said, Sharon, I have to ask you to stop coming to the meetings, the leadership meetings. And I said, why? And she said, and she was so good about managing me. I would often tell her that, you're being paid really to manage me as well as the operations stuff. But she was my number two, and other people I know went to her, and then she would come to me. And she'd say, let's put it this way. I know since you were probably in kindergarten, you walked and strolled into that kindergarten and you just owned the room. You were like bossing people around. This is the way it should be. And she said, when you come into the meetings as the CEO, even though you think you're just adding more ideas to the conversation, and I really would just spitball with everybody else, throw out some ideas. In my mind, it's just one more idea. But from an employee's perspective and all our team leaders, she goes, I watch it happen, Sharon. She goes, they automatically pivot. And then all they're talking about is your ideas then. And you don't recognize it because you didn't intend for them to do that. But because you brought it up, you're okay to let the conversation sort of blow up around that. But we might be missing some really other good ideas because you're just such a personality force in the room, And so I was really, at first I was kind of having my feelings hurt because I'm a girl sometimes. And, it sounded like, what? I don't want to, I'm not to be included. But then I thought they had the courage to tell me that because I can get excited about an idea and I'm selling it without even realizing I'm selling it. And it may not be in our best interest. So that was a reality check too. You get all these wonderful ego checks along the way as you're growing a business, if you're smart enough to listen to them.
Fantastic employees. And I mean, it is so true. It is so true because you're the leader. They're wanting to try to please you and they're worried and you're thinking you're part of the team, but you are the owner. So then you also talked about how you have an attorney on staff so that you're on the phone that you can rely on. And then you talked about hiring a broker because you knew that you wanted to sell your business. And so I want the listeners to hear that I think you really did this like cookie cutter textbook way that you should go. And because of that, it was multi-million dollars that you sold your company for, right?
Yes, I was very fortunate. And and it's funny because you don't know what you don't know.
Right.
And you have to keep that in mind that no matter what you're venturing into, and I describe it as, and I've told this to other people, like when I had my business idea, any of my business ideas, I feel it in my gut. Like, I know, just get out of my way, give me enough time. I know this will be successful. And that's a powerful force because not everybody gets that gut feeling. And that's a wonderful thing. But the problem is you can start to think and start to believe, well, because I have this really strong feeling, I can do it all. I can get us to where we need to be. And in reality, that force is really just getting you to first base.
Mhm.
And there's a reason a whole lot of businesses never get, the vast majority of businesses never get past first base. And I think women in particular are poised to do well because they're more collaborative in nature and they tend to look for connections versus a hierarchy of, and so I started looking at what are the connections I need? What do I need to learn that I don't know about? So here I am. I had this very successful 100-person, 6-state company, and I thought, okay, I want to sell this company. So I interviewed, and they're not really called brokers, they're representatives, but um, so three representatives, they're more like real estate agents, except for your business. And the first, I interviewed three, and I picked those three because they had all had transactions in our realm of service. So a service provider. And I thought, okay, so the first one I interviewed, I they're talking, yeah, we're going to promise you, you're going to get the moon and the stars. And they were this big on their promotional glossy brochures of how great they were. And uh, they didn't ask any questions initially about me or my business. And so I paused and I said, can you tell me who the women are on your team and what role they have? And there was silence. These predominantly older white men in the Bay Area sitting in some fancy office said, well, don't we have Julie? Where's Julie? And I'm like, yeah, Julie, the assistant doesn't, I'm looking for someone else. And so they said, okay, well, yeah, no. I said, okay, well, I'll get back to you because I told myself I want to live my values. I want to lift other women up along the way. I am not going to do business with a company of just old white men. Like that is too often the status quo. There's enough people wanting to do business with them. The second company was they didn't have any women, but they were far more savvy about asking a lot about my business and company to make me feel like it was about me. But then the third group I reached out to, oh, they were a much smaller organization, and they had the primary guy was the old white guy, but his quant statistical woman and they or person was a woman, and she had just this incredible, these are the math people who really can put valuations on every little thing you can't even imagine. There's some algorithm that can be attached, and they're called quants. They're like quantitative people. So she was a woman, and then his number two was also a woman, and they really worked as a kind of a threesome trifecta to answer different questions. And he was fantastic. I was really charmed by all three of them. And he also had represented women-owned businesses, which was important to me because we're kind of a different breed. And I'm not going to apologize for that, but you got to know how to deal with us. So so I ended up working with him, and that was when I started to realize everything I didn't know, like how to orient the business and pitch it so that it would be appealing to different kinds of buyers. And, I just would have put it out there like, here's who we are and what we do. And he's like, yeah, that doesn't work with a company this size. You have to understand the interests, like why somebody would be buying you, what's in it for them. And because I was running it as my whole world, and this is just going to probably be added to a portfolio, and how do you transition things? So I learned an incredible amount. It was a great experience. And I'm glad it all worked out because they were consistent in telling me, well, if this transaction gets closed. And I'm like, yeah, this transaction has to close. I don't want to get to the ending and have it all fall apart. So he said, well, here's how you keep from that happening. And his first question, I love this one, is he said, tell me, Sharon, tell me what are the worst things in the deepest part of the closet that you're having to hide. And I said, oh, wow. I go, like, what does that mean? Have I embezzled from the company? And he goes, well, have you? And I said, no. And he's like, okay, well, I have to know these things because it's all going to come out. The quant woman figures it all out. So there's no hiding anything. And I much rather find out now. And he gave me an example of a practice. It was a medical practice that was being sold. And it was in the 11th hour that the owner disclosed that the primary physician had his license revoked. And he was, I mean, that's a big deal. And so he was asking, he goes, that's what I'm looking for. Like, what are the things you're afraid someone's going to find out? And I said, I run a kitchen table company. I go, we are not fancy Wall Street funds. And I said, we are, okay, let's make more money than we spend. And I go, here's how I said, really, the mom at the kitchen table with my family budget looks very similar to the mom CEO running the company. And I said, it is not rocket science. The only difference is that I was a little more in tune with, because I worked with primarily women in a pediatric realm. And I said, you have to be aware of what's important to them, when you're looking at a benefits package, like, and we had we had 4 core values we operated from. And the first one was put kids first. And I said, and that includes your own kids. I said, so if your kids get sick and you can't come to work, I am never going to question you on that. You are not going to be penalized. I said, my God, small children especially are like petri dishes, and they are just like walking disease. It's a miracle any family makes it through the winter. It's so contagious.
Yeah. We just dealt with that last week, so amen to that.
Yeah. Yeah, it never ends. Mm-hmm. And the moment they get to be like, I don't know, 10, it's like there's a light at the end of the tunnel that, oh, we might not all get the flu this winter. But because of that, we had a fierce loyalty in the company from my employees, because as women, they were not necessarily accustomed to a leadership team that says, we understand your kids get sick. We understand that your parents are aging. We understand that, I implemented a parental or kind of like a family leave policy before we were getting any help to do that, because it was just really important to us. I kept women on, I had several women that had some sort of illness like breast cancer, and we kept them on the insurance and paid that part of the insurance, because I'm like, even though they couldn't work for 6 months, I'm like, I'm not going to be the company who kicks a woman off of her health insurance. And so, I mean, health insurance companies don't like that. They would prefer you to move them on, but, come get me. That was my attitude.
See, and I love that and her time is short, but the fact that you take care of your employees, the fact that, you come from a caring and understanding and do I want to be treated attitude, kind of actually the golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And I love that, because I truly believe that because you had that mentality and you ran your business like that, that's why it was so successful.
Oh, hands down. And I don't take that for granted even now. It's some people are like, oh, look how accomplished you are and what you've done. And I said, you know what I did? I did the right thing by people, and all those people stayed with me. There were times when COVID got bad and I was laying in my bed when they shut down the whole world. I was like holding my head and thinking, this is it. This is going to be the end of my company. And I get a call from my number 2, and she says, okay, the leadership team's all ready to gather and step up. What do we have to do for others? And that kind of mentality, and even in your darkest hour, someone's got it worse than you. Mm-hmm. And so you've kind of got to, and we really nurtured that. We gave people like $250 a year to just give away to coworkers in terms of flowers or candy. We're like, if you want us to send them candy on your behalf because they're having a crappy time, we'll do it, and you can have all the kudos, but we'll cover the price. And so it helped our staff build relationships, but those small things matter. Mm-hmm. And it's so worth, it's just so worth investing in people. I testified with our state legislature. Oregon now has a paid family leave policy. It's like an insurance policy that companies over a certain size it applies to. And I was one of the few businesses that spoke in favor of it, because when I went down, and I really thought, and it was my legislator who knew me and said, would you come down and testify? And I said, sure. And I showed up, and I could not believe how it was like one business leader after another coming up. They happened to all be older gentlemen who got up and said, this is going to destroy our family business. This is going to destroy our company. This is going to be the end of our whatever. We could not possibly support primarily women needing time off because they've had a baby, or because, and I'm sitting there thinking, do you realize she's actually birthing your next generation of employees? Like, there's a certain health you want to embed with that first year of life, that, and the best thing you do is give them mom. And so I went up to testify, and I said, I'm going to sound a little different. And I described my company and the size of it and what we were doing voluntarily. And I said, and here's the big thing. None of these people are telling you. And everything got quiet in the room. And I said, businesses will adapt. And, they were silent, and they're kind of fuming and shuffling their feet behind me. But I was like, oh, get over yourselves. Like, if you just decide to do the right thing, I'm a believer, we can all boats rise if we all want them to.
Well, Sharon, it has been a delight. How do people find you, especially your books?
Yes. So I sold my company. Personal passion of mine has always been personal finance and child development. So I married the two, and I wrote a book called Cradle to Credit. And it's every year from birth to 18, money lessons you should be teaching your kiddo. And it's available on Amazon. It's called Cradle to Credit, Sharon Soliday. And I can personally be reached through, right now, what I'm doing is just talking to people that have an interest in business, or adolescents who have questions about business. And that's my first and last name, Sharon Soliday, no Rolin there, just SharonSoliday.com. And that'll take you to my blog. And I'm always writing about money or some such thing. So check it out if you have an interest.
Well, thank you so much for being on. I just love that you gave the behind the scenes stuff that nobody talks about. So moms, I hope that you took so many notes, because she is a plethora of knowledge. She's been there, she's done that. And so go out and make it a great day and take her advice. Beautiful moms, remember, you are unbreakable. Keep illuminating the world with your strength, pursuing your dreams, and reveling in the splendor of motherhood. This is Charisse Walker, bidding you farewell for now. Stay tuned for more empowering conversations on the next episode of the Unbreakable Mompreneurs podcast. Until then, keep shining bright. Signing off with love, Charisse Walker.